Spectre Vision Radio.
So the Irish had very clear lore at that stage. And the lore was that the high fairies, the Shida, the kind of noble fairies, were the walking spirits of the original inhabitants of Ireland, the Tuatha Dé Danann. That these were the tribe, they were magic users, etc. The last act of the Tuatha Dé Danann, in order to preserve themselves, was they went into the mounds, into the hills, also into the waters, into the hills, and into the mountains. And so when you met them walking around now, you weren't meeting their physicality. Their physicality was inside in the ground.
They claim that our eyes will just be created a slightly different from what they are. We talk, we see things are not normal.
Welcome to Strange Familiars. How are you doing tonight, Allison?
Doing well.
As people may or may not have noticed, we are now part of the Spectre Vision radio family, which includes quite a few like-minded podcasts, quite a few podcasts from friends of ours, and some I've never even heard from before, so I'm excited. But it's a group of like-minded podcasts gathered together, and I'm very excited to be a part of it. So you've heard me kind of hint about things going on and prepping new things and adding video and stuff like that. It's all been a part of getting ready for this launch. So
what's happening today?
That's happening today. Today is the big launch day. So this is a special episode. We usually don't publish on Wednesdays because we're announcing our Spectre Vision debut. Everyone's getting 2 episodes this week, today and tomorrow. So you get 2 episodes right in a row. Hopefully we're reaching some new people. And if we are, they're in for a treat because it's a double episode of Brother Richard.
And who we want to thank profusely because this is the double amount of time that he's actually done this interview.
Yeah. I mentioned at the beginning of the interview with him, we recorded a 3-hour interview.
Mm-hmm.
And I accidentally deleted it. It was nice enough on very short notice
to dedicate 3 more hours to doing it again.
Take 3 more hours and redo it with me. So double thanks, really quadruple thanks to Brother Richard for taking the time to do that, for being a guest, and for being one of my favorite people to interview. And I know he's a listener favorite as well. So I thought for debuting on Spectre Vision, it's a good time to bring Brother Richard on again. And we will be talking in this first part about Fae and intentions, so the fairies, and separately about intentions. But you'll find throughout this entire conversation in both episodes that we keep coming back to intention. So it's a very important part of this conversation. We get into some listener questions on tulpas, mantras, and more after that. And then we continue next episode with more listener questions.
I don't normally have access at the ready to anybody in any sort of like professional religious, like I don't know any other monks of any religious persuasion. I might not even know any religious people, like really, I mean, like that where you would have access to them in sort of like a
people with a profession.
A profession. Yeah. I'm not talking about people who are, personal practitioners of any sort, but like how often do you get to ask them, like someone who's a monk, a question? I just find that, I mean, I have a bunch of questions that are not paranormal related because he's someone who almost like a hermit or someone.
You just took a different path in life.
Yeah. And it's really sort of on that, I don't want to say on the outside of the norm, but it isn't really in this day and age, many people's chosen path.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's one of the episodes, now we've done so many with Brother Richard at this point, but one of the episodes back, you asked him some questions, and I'm not sure if this was a patron episode or a regular episode, but you just kind of asked him, like, what's your day like, and what do you do? And,
yeah, and there's still more questions about, like, because I think Brother Richard and I are the same age.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just like, it's curious to me, like what kind of music did you like when you were 13? And like, I think we get this idea that like, once you get on that path, you can't have any of you just always have to be like above reproach in every way. And you have to act the most perfect way, and you have to be available for everyone at every time. And I think for the most part he is. But there was one moment when years ago when he talked about, it was in a writing he wrote about, like sort of not wanting to engage with someone, even like, because it is, I mean, it's your job, but your life's calling. Like, it must be difficult to have a work-life balance when you're in that
when your life is your work.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like people who are in the military, where you can't really separate that from your like, what's the downtime like? Do you ever just binge Netflix? Like,
well, we talk a little bit about that. Okay. I'm not sure which part this is.
Okay. But, yeah, I heard some of it, but there's
some TV conversation for sure. So yes, he has watched Dairy Girls. If you.
Oh, okay.
John from Riverbend Comics and I will be at the Harrisburg Comic Con on August 23rd and 24th. That's at the Giant Expo Hall at the Farm Show Complex in Harrisburg. John will, of course, be selling comics, and I will be there with my books and some prints. Might do some live drawing. You never know. Maybe I'll knock out some live drawing, and I'll be helping John, and come out and see us. Love to see everybody. Once again, that's the Harrisburg Comic Con. I think it's actually called the Harrisburg Comic and Pop Con.
Oh, do they have like toys and stuff, you think? Just pop culture stuff?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And that's, again, August 23rd and 24th at Giant Expo Hall at the Farm Show Complex in Harrisburg.
It's probably much better suited for that kind of like for a Comic-Con.
I mean, they used to have it in an old mall in an empty department store, which was fine.
Yeah.
I haven't been at the Farm Show. I haven't been since it was in the old mall. So we'll see. I used to get an artist table and just sell my drawings and sell books and stuff there. But I'll be at the Riverbend Comics table this time. I won't be. I think they have something called Artist Alley where they set up all the artists. I won't be there. I'll be with John.
You'll be in your own alley.
I'll be in Riverbend at the Riverbend.
Yeah.
And Allison and I, if I get up early enough, will be at the Lancaster Postcard Expo. That's at the Farm and Home Center in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, this Saturday, August 16th, selling photos.
We love agricultural venues.
It does give, like I said last week, it does kind of give a window into South Central Pennsylvania, where John and I are going to a Comic-Con at the Farm Show Complex, and you're doing this Postcard Expo at the Farm and Home Center in Lancaster. So come on out and buy some photos from Allison.
It's a shame because there is like a really like on-brand paranormal place to hold these things in the area. At Spooky Nook. That seems like it would be more on brand, but no.
All right. So without further ado, let's get into this very special episode with Brother Richard. I'd like to welcome Brother Richard back to the show. How are you doing tonight?
I'm good. It's good to be with you as always. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming back a second time. For those who aren't on Discord and didn't see my frustration in real time, we recorded this long, lovely conversation once, and I proceeded to accidentally delete the file, and Brother Richard is so nice to come back and do it again. Thank you so much.
Don't worry, we'll see the hand of Providence in it. Obviously, I either said something that shouldn't have been said or didn't say something that should have been, so we'll go with that instead.
I like that take on it. That makes me feel a lot better. So it wasn't just my incompetence, it was the universe aiding in something here.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, what we have is a subject that I wanted to talk about. Well, two subjects that I want to talk about, and we have some listener questions. And the first one involves one of the listener questions, so we'll kind of incorporate that as we go on here. Because I'm writing this book on fairy belief in Pennsylvania, It's come up a few times with listener questions as well. And it's just, I think we covered a little bit in one of our talks, but it's so interesting to talk about and to cover. And that is the idea of, the fairy belief in Ireland and in the Celtic countries. We can say, almost certainly predated Christianity. So
indeed, yeah. Mm-hmm.
When Christianity got there, how did the Celtic Christian Church react and think of and treat the fairies?
Mm.
And before we get into this, since it makes sense, again, we talked about this a little in the past. People often talk about the Celtic Christian Church as if it's completely separate from the Catholic Church. So let's address that before we start with the fairies.
Okay, so historical perspective first, and obviously let all of your listeners or watchers at this stage feel free to research this themselves. But if they do, they will find the following, that actually the idea of a separate Celtic Christian church is something quite recent, and it really came about through kind of Victorian scholarship that had a particular kind of agenda, which was to try and separate the churches, particularly to try and, I suppose, block any idea that there was a connection to Rome, especially. But if we go through the actual history, what we find is that the juridical rights of the church as it was set up here very much look back to Rome and to the apostolic sees for their authority. So there's a very, very clear teaching from the earliest stages of the church that a church is valid when it has what we call apostolic lineage. It can go right the way back to an apostle. So to this day, bishop in the Roman Catholic communion, indeed in the Orthodox communion as well, can go back through their bishop, if you like, their bishop family tree, all the way back to one of the apostles. And this is called apostolic succession. The same was true for the early Christian church. So were they somewhat separate in terms of custom, liturgy, and the way in which they lived? Yes, they were, but that was common at that time. You had the Christians founded by Thomas in India, for example, and they developed liturgy in a particular way that spoke to the culture there. In the same way, the Celtic Christian churches developed their own forms of liturgy and their own ways of doing things that sort of brought in the customs, because the basic Christian evangelization model had always been hold on to what's good or what's perceived to be good in the home culture, as it were, correct what seems to be negative. So, for example, when the early Christian missionaries through Patrick came here, one of the first things they tried to do was get rid of the relation with some of the pagan deities and things like that, particularly sacrificing animals and also sacrificing even humans at times to pacify the pagan gods or to bring a new harvest or those kind of things. So those things were slowly stamped out. And when I say stamped out, we're stamped out peaceably. The Celtic churches are remarkable in terms of the whole history of the Christian tradition, in that conversion happened in the space of 2 generations and with no bloodshed. Obviously, that's how evangelization should happen, but historically, particularly where more kind of state-imposed conversion, where, say, for example, a king became converted and then imposed conversion on his followers. And as the king goes, so the land goes kind of idea. That was something that was present in other countries, wasn't present in the Celtic countries, particularly Ireland. So we also have Irenaeus, for example, one of the earliest church fathers. Irenaeus, who was a disciple of Polycarp, who was a disciple of John the Apostle. So within 100 years of the Christian revelation as such, you have somebody as important as Irenaeus stating that though the churches are divided in language and in custom, they are united in faith and they look to Rome, and that it is the same creed that is preached and lived. And he names the various peoples at the time, the Greeks, the Romans, etc. And he names the Gauls, which was the Roman name for the Celts. So the Celtic Church was seen and was in communion at that stage. Many years ago now, about 20 years ago, I visited Mount Athos in Greece, which is the center place of all of the mother house, if you like, of Orthodox monasticism, both Russian, Greek and Romanian, extraordinary monasteries, some of which have had continuous monastic observance for nearly 1,500 years.
Nice.
And I mean, they speak to the fact that they were in communion with the Celtic churches. They venerate all of the saints, pre-schism and things like that, for the year 1000. They showed us relics of the Celtic saints that had been sent by Irish monasteries, now long gone since the suppression of the monasteries, etc. And even spoke about the fact that Patrick, this is the interesting thing, after being commissioned by the Pope to bring the gospel to the Irish, so Patrick felt this call. What did he do? He didn't come immediately. He trains as a priest and then as a bishop, and he makes sure that he receives the blessing to go. And then they claim, at least their tradition is, that he spent then 40 days on Mount Athos in preparation for his journey, and that they gave him there one of the most important relics, which is translated in Irish as the Bahalisa, which was his staff. And his staff was supposed to have either been or contained relics of the staff that Christ himself used on his apostolic journeys.
Oh, wow.
And that staff was publicly burned then during the Protestant Reformation in Ireland. It was publicly burned in front of the gates of Trinity Abbey, which then became Trinity College in Dublin many years later. So you have a particular agenda, which is to say, they were all autocephalous, they were all completely separate. It was kind of a communion of equals. But all of that is belied by the fact that when the Celtic churches, who had slightly different calendars and slightly different customs in terms of things like monastic tonsure, when Easter was celebrated, etc., they came together. The famous Synod of Whitby in England, which was under the spiritual authority of Abbess Hilda, St. Hilda of Whitby, and they debated whether or not they would go with the Roman customs, which were now across the whole of Europe because the calendar had been changed by the emperor. And it was agreed that the Celtic churches would, in order to be in union with Rome. So, look at your history and follow that. So that's the base. There's the foundation. The next thing becomes, what did they do when they arrived and found all of this belief in the good people and the Shida and the various taxonomic kind of denominations of the good people over here. So the Irish had very clear lore at that stage. And the lore was that the high fairies, the Shida, the kind of noble fairies, were the walking spirits of the original inhabitants of Ireland, the Tuatha De Danann. That these were the tribe, they were magic users, etc., almost considered kind of demigod-like in the Irish psyche at the time. But when the Celts had come and some of the other tribes had come to Ireland, they had fought with the Tuatha De Danann. And interestingly, what overcame them? The Celts had weapons of iron and bronze, whereas the Tuatha De Danann had weapons of copper. So it may actually have been a historical memory of coming, in on a Paleolithic civilization. But anyway, they wiped them out, and the last act of the Tuatha De Danann, in order to preserve themselves, was they went into the mounds, into the hills, also into the waters, into the hills, and into the mountains. And so when you met them walking around now, you weren't meeting their physicality. Their physicality was inside in the ground. They were seen to be semi-substantial walking spirits, mistress of magic, and huge courtesy, huge respect, huge gift was given to them. The lesser ones, the kind of leprechauns and curlicons and the sort of gnomish kind of peoples and the trickster kind of ones, the ones of the wild, etc., they were the ones then that they kind of said, we don't know where they came from. We were not really sure what they are. We just know, again, that you have to be extremely careful with them and very respectful. And so the church never made a dogmatic statement about the Middle Kingdom at all. And so there are two positions held to this day within the Christian kind of orthodox, and I mean orthodox with a small o, the kind of orthodox teaching. One is that there are simply angels or demons, and anything that is not an angel is there for a demon, right? And that was very much taken up within the Protestant tradition, particularly, especially within the evangelical tradition. But within the Catholic and Orthodox, with the big O traditions, there was also the holding that there may be other peoples that we do not know about, that we simply haven't been told about, and we are no concern of them and they're no concern of ours. And that found particular authority in the writings of some of the early fathers, particularly Jerome, and the life of Anthony of the Desert, whom we talked about before, who met his encounter with the faun, the satyr, who he thought at first was a demon and did his usual, prayers and blessings to dispel. And the little fella stood there and said, don't know what you're doing, but I'm here in front of you in a conversation. And they professed to be hungry for the gospel of salvation. They said that the Lord had given them, God had given them the wild and had given humanity the cultivated parts of the earth, but that the wild belonged to them. In Ireland, then, you had this idea that they were a number of the little things. As I said, the Shida, they understood, but the little things were either angels who had fallen but hadn't fallen completely. Mm-hmm. It's an Irish solution to an Irish problem. The idea that they were sort of mischievous but not evil, and that they would be saved on the last day because they had kind of repented in their fall and had landed halfway. The second was possibly the souls of the dead or the souls of unbaptized children. And one of the reasons that they went for the souls of unbaptized children was because of the playfulness, tricksterishness of it, the idea that this was how children actually behaved, and the kind of selfishness and the pretending and the illusion end of things along the way. And the third then was simply they were the people of the wild. They were the ones who owned the wild. And they owned the night particularly. The day belonged to humanity. Nighttime darkness, etc., belonged to them. And, in days when you didn't have electric light or gas light or anything else, any kind of a journey was, particularly with the weather that Ireland has, it was treacherous. You made it as quickly as you could back into the firelight as quickly as possible.
Yeah, we were speaking last night about how dark. It's hard to conceive as modern people. Our flashlights that we carry and headlamps are very bright. Back in the day, they would have had, a lantern or a torch at best, and there wouldn't have been ambient light around.
So we had a brother who was convinced that one of the reasons that the fairies were seen a lot in the early days, and they had these trooping fairies who would gather around horses and carts and would walk with you until you got home. And just as you got home, they would go off and you would be there. Mm-hmm. And sometimes there was missing time, and sometimes you got there much faster if they were more comfortable with you. But one of the theories he put forward was that if you have lanterns hung around the horse and cart, as they would have had in those days, and you have the slightly bouncing motion of the horse and cart as it's going along, that this may have actually put the rider or the driver into a kind of a hypnagogic state, in which case it became either a dream-like consciousness hallucination or, the ability to actually see what was around them. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot to that. We all know what it's like if you go running or walking or jogging at night with a torch. Even the fact that the torch is bouncing up, it can be quite disorientating after a while.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, so the way the church dealt with them was in a very pragmatic way, which was they're there. We deal with them. We have our own prayers and rituals which work. As long as people are treating them with respect and courtesy, they mind their own business and we mind our own business. And that's one of the things about, the current wave. And I spoke to Joe about this on the Modern Fairy podcast, the current wave of people really wanting, connection with them and dealing with them. Like that is absolutely anathema to 1,000 years of history, if not longer, which was, if they wanted to have contact with you, they would have contact with you. You didn't go looking for them, because to go looking for them was to annoy them or to upset them or and sometimes I think we do the spiritual world a kind of a lack of courtesy, maybe is the way to put it, when we kind of tramp in on their home turf. I mean, if somebody just knocked on your door one evening and said, I want to walk around the house and ask you questions and shine lights in your face and things like that, set the dogs on them and kick them out. And I think the same thing happens to some extent with those who, with the best will in the world, maybe are looking for experience and interaction. So I think I mentioned the story to you before. I had cousins down the country and they had a fairy fort, a fairy mound on their farm. And when we went there as young children, we were absolutely allowed to go there during the hours of daytime, and you could play in the fairy fort. It was marvelous, twisted hawthorn trees, and we had all kinds of games and things like that there, beautiful stones. But the way you observed your courtesy was you said thank you when you finished. Every stone or stick that you used had to be put back as close as possible to where you found it, and nothing was ever taken away from the fort. So we would be lined up by our older cousins, and we had to turn out our pockets to make sure that we were not bringing anything back into the house. Because if we did, then there was problems. And one of our other brothers, he had a similar story with one of his families where one of the kids decided, I like this particular stone, I'm bringing it home. And by the time they got to the house, their arm had swollen up completely.
Wow.
And the mother from Dublin had wanted to call an ambulance straight away. And the granny who lived down there just went, what did you take? And so he produced the stone, and he was called all kinds of, and was sent back down, I think with an offering of bread as well, and had to leave the bread and the stone and apologize. And by the time he got back to the house, the arm was back to normal.
Amazing.
They lived side by side with them as kind of prickly neighbors, but neighbors that you respected, and that they could do you a good turn occasionally if you were kind to them. But it was a sort of an armed detente. That was the way it lived.
I mentioned when we talked previously that this is mirrored in the Lakota and their belief in Bigfoot, at least the ones I talked to. I know it's not a monolithic belief
Sure.
amongst any people, but the folks I talked to said, you would talk to them and say, they'd tell your Bigfoot story, ask what it is. They say, oh, we think it's a spirit. I went through all that before, but it was often like, well, do you think it's bad or good? And they were like, well, neither. You don't know. And they said, but you don't necessarily, because you don't know, it could bring bad news. It could bring good news. It could be an omen of good or bad, or it could be showing up because in their belief, someone's done something bad, but you don't know. Sure. So they said, it's better just not to see it. They're not going looking for it. If it's there, it's there. They acknowledged, it was 100% real to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was the way, like, even as children, we were taught if stuff turned up, you greeted it, you were respectful to it, you went on your way. I mean, we have a particular blessing prayer that we pray on any kind of a journey, which is, I wish the peace of Christ and his kingdom upon all beings that I encounter, those that I pass by, those that I pass through, those that I pass around, those that I see or do not see. May they be at peace with me, and may I be at peace with them. And and what I love about that is the idea of, I'm passing these beings all the time. I mightn't see them. I might even be passing through them. And so as long as my intention is a peaceful, blessing intention, then I have kind of, a safe journey. And also, and it was one of the things that we were always taught within the Catholic tradition particularly, but within the monastic tradition especially, was before setting out on a journey to ask one's guardian angel to speak to any unseen power or spirit or whatever that we might pass by, in case we were discourteous to it without it knowing, so that the angel kind of interceded in between for sort of peace. And I had one experience, I think I mentioned this, I certainly mentioned on the Discord some years ago, of seeing, I love the phrase you use, the sort of unpeople or non-people or whatever, but I was stuck in traffic and just watching people walking by the way you do, waiting for traffic to move. And this woman was walking along, and there was another figure behind her who was a woman, but all I can say is that she looked stretched, she looked lengthened, stretched. And she was walking as though she was walking through water, this kind of very slow sort of walking. And I sort of looked away, and then I looked back again, and there was no acknowledgement of anybody around that they saw anything odd or weird. So I started praying that prayer of blessing for whatever. And the moment I began to pray, the person, the being, whatever, just turned and looked directly at me in the car and smiled.
Wow.
And that was a moment of me going, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like, whatever you are, I have no idea what you are, but there was something very Fae-ish about it. And it went on its way, and traffic moved, and I went on my way. But every time I pass that particular street, I often think of it since.
While we're on the Fae folk, we're going to get to listener questions later, but we'll just pop this one in from Damara, who is asking, do the Fae folk have souls? Will they go to heaven if they want? If not, can they be baptized so they can go to heaven if they wish for these things to happen?
Okay, so it's a really interesting question, and it was debated all over the place. the church councils and all of those kind of things brought up these kind of conversations around what happens to the rest of creation other than human beings. And so the church's teaching is very clear that angels are saved and demons aren't. Because with angelic intelligence, they made a particular fundamental decision. And when an angel makes a decision, it cannot change its mind. So the reason we can change our minds is because we receive more information. Other things happen. But an angelic intelligence, which the demons are as well, are in possession of, when they bring their intelligence to bear on something, they have full understanding of it in a moment. So they receive full understanding. The tradition within the early Christian church especially was that it was the incarnation, it was the revelation of the incarnation, that the divine was going to unite itself with physical creation, that led to the fall of the angels, or to the fall of some of the angels, I should say. So be that as it may, then the question becomes, what about other intelligences or spirits or whatever, if they are there? So in as much as they can have the capacity to change their mind and have free will, then yes, they can be saved, because they can make a decision to live according to good conscience, good reason, etc. Do we baptize them? Well, that's an interesting one. We know in the tradition that saints have baptized and offered the sacraments on occasion to beings that would be at least in between. We spoke earlier on Strange Familiars about the famous stories of the werewolves who received the last rites and communion as the kind of curse of this was lifted from them. We have the story of St. Brendan, who baptizes and gives communion to a mermaid along the way. There are other similar stories with different saints as well. We have the story of, as I mentioned, Anthony, where we have the faun begging to know about Christ and the good news. So the fundamental answer, again, is there is no dogmatic position on this other than what we say is that all that is good will be raised and saved. You know, the famous Julian of Norwich, all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall eventually be well. We do not know the manner of its ultimate unfolding, but we trust in, at least in our tradition, we believe in the divine as infinite mercy and infinite compassion, love. So there is nothing created, including the demons, that was not, at least in its original essence, perfectly good. And so anything that is good will be lifted and redeemed and renewed. And the only thing that makes that impossible is if something with conscious free will chooses not to be part of that. So that's it. I have come across those stories of the mediumistic experiences where purportedly, you know, spirits of gnomes and things like that asked for baptism or pleaded for anointing or blessing, whatever. We would offer blessing to anything that asks a blessing. But in terms of the full, you know, ontological truth of what was speaking in that moment, I can't say. I don't.
So the next thing I want to talk about, and people heard me bring this up on last week's show, but I think, again, it's important to reiterate, and it's something I wanted your perspective on, is intention, and particularly around this Annabelle doll. And once again, let me say, this is not a comment on the Warrens. I really don't know that much about them. It's not a comment on whether the doll was ever possessed or infested with something. I don't know. But I do know that I feel like intention is a powerful thing. And this fellow's death is tragic. And let's not separate that from anything.
Yeah,
absolutely tragic. And our hearts go out to his family and his friends and everyone that was involved. No one wants this to happen. But, you know, I've seen it so summarily just dismissed out of hand by many people who I respect and many people who I consider intelligent and well-versed in this stuff. And I get their reaction. I do understand what they're saying. They want to say, don't jump so quickly to a conclusion that this doll was possessed. Absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Sure.
I agree with that. But on the other side, I kind of say, don't jump so quickly to dismiss intention. And we've had people for dozens of years, if not longer, I'm not sure how long exactly it's been around. I know it's been around for quite a while, who have treated this doll as if it was possessed or infested. The example I give is they have like special tongs or gloves or something to so no one touches it. And they've been treating it this way for years upon years. And isn't that worth something as far as all this goes? Like what does intention do? And I wanted to get your thoughts on that as well.
Well, I would agree. I mean, first of all, Lord of mercy on the poor man, may he rest in peace. But I would agree completely. The power of intention, the power of story, even the power of narrative to actually create an effect. There'll be that an emotional effect, an energetic effect, a physical effect. There's no doubts about that in my mind. So much so that, a key element of our own meditative contemplative training is the forming of intention, and how that's very important as we move into particular spiritual acts or being present. And just to take it out of my own tradition for a moment, people, if they're, I don't know if anybody will ever see this, but I'm surrounded by empty shelves here at the moment because I'm in the process of moving house with the new job that I have. But if those shelves were filled with the books that they usually are, then I would show you a very interesting text on, but the translation of a text of Tibetan medicine. And within the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, one of the recipes, if you like, for the preparation of a particular remedy calls for the use of a white bone-handled knife. And get this, a knife that has been used to murder at least 13 people. And the next step in the recipe says, but if you can't get one that has been used to murder at least 13 people, get one that has been used to murder at least 7 people. And then the next line says, but if you can't get one that has been used to murder at least 7 people, get a white bone-handled knife, and this is the important bit, and tell it that it has murdered 13 people before use. Okay? So
I'm not laughing at the concept, by the way. I'm bemused by the
wonderful practical instruction.
Exactly. Yeah.
And this is the power of intention in action. So again, the importance of the text isn't, they're not actually looking for a knife that is or people to go and murder or anything. This is, from the Buddhist tradition, it's absolutely about peace and stability and healing and all of that. But what it's doing is it's training the practitioner to understand that the intention with which they use the elements is just as important an ingredient, if you like, in the remedy as are the herbs and the bits and pieces that are being used. This is absolutely universal across all religious traditions, all contemplative traditions. That actually what we are judged on is the primary intention of the mind and of the heart. So if I go and do something good, but out of an egocentric, selfish intention to let myself be seen, okay, the good act is still done, but the intention diffuses the good energy or the blessing or whatever you'd want to call it around it, and vice versa. If I go and do something, with a very good intention, but it causes problems or doesn't go the way it's gone, it might cause difficulty for people, but the spiritual world sees the good intention and the energy with which that is accomplished. So this is why in most of the meditative traditions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Islam, and the various combinations of them, all Christianity included, the forming of the primary intention is extremely important. And emotion has a much more secondary place because intention is located within the will. And so we make a particular decision. Now, where emotion comes in with narrative. And so narrative can create an emotional intentionality, say, for example, in this particular doll. Mm-hmm. When you think of the story associated with it, true or not, is a powerful story. Right. All of the multimedia, the movies, the millions of people who've seen it, the scaremongering that goes on around it. So to some extent, this is a parallel in the conversation we had about relics. We talked about how there is the relic, which is maybe the piece of the saint or whatever, or it's something that they used. And one of the ways to actually create relics that was used along the way, which led to a huge confusion of people thinking, oh, relics are false. But it was that you made an exact replica of the original relic, touched it to the first relic with particular rites and prayers, etc. And then that could be sent off. Now, it was understood as a second class, if you like, but it was seen as just as much a relic as the actual thing that was in the original. And this even led, within the Strange Familiars purview, to the idea of the famous stories of the Yeti scalps in Pangboche Monastery in Tibet, because one of the parallels within the Buddhist tradition and the Christian, the Catholic tradition and Orthodox tradition is very much the cult of relics. Almost the same understanding, same theology, in fact. So when the explorers went and were shown, here is a scalp of a Yeti, and they had all of these monks, swearing to them, this is an authentic Yeti scalp. And then they take the hair and discover it's goat hair, and they immediately go, lying monks, or,
right.
Maybe they didn't, or whatever.
Naive, or whatever.
Because of the ritual use of the scalp, it was a scalp of Yeti. Mm. Because when the monk wears it in the ritual, the spirit of the Yeti is present. So again, our understanding of worldviews and cultures, etc., can very much cause a problem in terms of communication of what's real and what isn't, and what's there. And I think where intentionality is concerned, what I'd really say to everybody who's involved with this world at all is to recognize that whether you want to go the current physics route of all is consciousness, or whether you want to go the ancient traditions of spiritual worlds and presence of entities, whatever way you want to go, the one thing you are using is your mind and your imagination to be able to encounter these things. So if I'm called to a haunting or to a problematic house or whatever along the way, if I go in there with the intention of, I'm about to be scared, something is going to happen, I'm weak, it's strong, whatever it might be, I'll be chased out of the place. But if I go in, as I do go in, with the authority of the lineage, the symbolism, the rituals, etc., along the way, not relying on my own strength, but on the formed intention to unite myself to the lineage and the presence of the divine, then we have a completely different experience. And if you look at all of that stuff that was feeding into that particular vessel, if you want to call it that object along the way, there is no doubt, but there is a field of intention around that. Human beings are very good at scaring themselves, and they're very, very good at generating negative experiences, particularly. And so when does the random occurrence afterwards or with it or whatever become actually a cause? That whole idea of correlation not being causation needs to be invoked. But at the same time, we can look at, for example, the experiments that the Newkirks did, where they created 3D printed versions of haunted objects and then discovered that the same haunted episodes were happening around those new objects. And that kind of blows people's mind. And they go one of two ways, which is it's all false and it's all self-generated by human beings. Or you can look at it the Tibetan Buddhist or the relic way, which is to say, no, when you have actually created something like this, there is a transition across. Now, that's not to say that you may not have a big, lovely field of intention created and some other entity decides, I can wear these clothes.
Sure.
I can have this. I can feed on this. We've talked before about how fear seems to be one of the great, across the board, seems to be one of the things that everything from cryptids to so-called aliens to whatever, seem to want to generate. Fear creates dependency, and it creates a constant focused attention that is feeding the other entity along the way. So generally, when these things are dismissed by prayer or simply by people laughing at them or taking verbal authority over them, they flee very quickly because they're not getting fear, they're not getting focused attention. Yeah. So I think there's a huge amount of truth in what you're saying about that. And the thing about it is, whether there was any causative factor between dull and field of intention and the man's death, it's now part of the story.
True.
It's part of the narrative. So it becomes something that again begins to fulfill this whole thing. And it's interesting. I believe I was reading or looking about it. I believe the latest custodian is a comedian. And what I would suggest, what I would expect is manifestations will probably drop now if it's being made fun of.
Yeah.
Because the chances are that it kind of punctures the bubble of negative intention or attention.
On the flip side of intention, I often bring this up because it's amazing to me to see, but B, I think it's important to note on the positive side of intention, just in the Strange Familiars Discord, we have just a little channel that's intention and prayer. And these are people from all different traditions in there. It's just, people do energy work, people, it's like I'll say semi-believers maybe, people who are sort of leaning, and then those who pray and et cetera, et cetera. And there has been, look, do we know that's done anything? No, of course not. But it just seems like such a wonderful thing. And there's been some wonderful outcomes, and including the fellow who had us all praying for his mom's house, where they felt the
presence there.
The pale crawler thing, which was just an amazing story, and so nice to hear, in a sense, like there's this good outcome, and whatever small part that group intention channel played is amazing to me.
There's a kind of Avengers Assemble element to it, that everybody comes with their own particular gift or modality or whatever, but again, fundamentally underneath it all, it's positive intention being sent towards in a focused way. And I think there is certainly enough scientific studies done over the years to show that at the very least intention has an effect on reality. You can even think of some of the famous water work that was done by that Japanese scientist who looked at the way water crystallizes, depending on the intentions that it's there. The plant studies. One of the great forgotten individuals in terms of the sort of beginning of paranormal study in a really strong way, 1960s, 70s, 80s, was a doctor called Dr. Lyle Watson, who wrote an extraordinary book, and I recommend this to everybody, but the book is called The Secret Life of Inanimate Objects. And that's literally what he's talking about, is when things are used, what happens to the thing when you surround it with intention, say. And he goes through everything from the loved teddy bear right the way through to the family heirloom, and the negative thing as well, it's kind of passed down, and how these can have various associations with them. I met somebody recently who is very sensitive, and her absolute horror at walking into an antique shop, for example, is really one of the most difficult things for her, because she can feel and regularly people would come to us, with things that they've bought in antique shops, or things that have been passed down, and we'll just say, look, would you bless it just to make sure it's not carrying anything with it? And we'll do that for them, of course. It's a real part of our human culture, and for thousands of years it has been the way we have understood the world. And it's only really in the last 200 years or so that this has been destabilized in a way. Like, I often talk about the fact that in Ireland up to 50, 60 years ago, the vast majority of people built their own house. So they had land, they built the house on the land. In order to do that, the very first thing that would happen would be the kind of grandfathers, the elders in the area or whatever, would walk the land with them and would say, yeah, here's a good spot, because they had the knowledge of where water ran, where flooding happened, all of that. But there would also then be the person who came to say, you can't have a corner of the house in that particular corner of the field because the fairies come through there, or because there used to be a grave there, or because whatever. So the house would slowly be marked out. At that point, the priest would come in and would bless the foundation. And part of the blessing of the foundation would be, and they would put in various religious objects. Bread was put in so that those in the family who lived there would never go hungry. There were various other water or wine was put in as a sign, again, they'd never be thirsty. They marked out the doorstep, because that was where you came in for birth and you went out for death. All of these things happened. And so intention was being built into the very walls of the thing from the beginning. And we do that still with our monasteries. Like, we're just after rebuilding some new offices here, and on the Feast of St. Francis now, they're offices. Like, they are just administrative offices, but they will be exercised and blessed and dedicated because they're part of the work we do. So that it's built in, and all of the traditions had something akin to that. And then all of a sudden we go to the mass produced and problems happen. And people come saying, can you come and do something with our home? And we tend to be on the back foot, kind of retroactively trying to balance stuff. Or it's being built in a way that just doesn't take into account how the land actually needs something to be built.
Okay, now we can move into some listener questions. And we'll start with Matt, who's talking about the practice of mantraic prayer. And this is in this practice, there can come a point where, if done consistently enough, the sense of a doer of the prayer drops away, and along with it, volition. The mantra continues on its own inertia for a time before itself ceasing in a profound sense of peaceful presence, which is difficult to convey. What would the Franciscan model of spiritual practice make of such experiences? Is this simply mindfulness or something more? And he says the cessation can last for hours before fading back in, accompanied by a strong sense of aversion. Seems to result in lasting changes to the personality, as well as the knowledge and experience of the existence of such a state seems to somehow make it easier to access a less tranquil version of it generally, even during the noise of day-to-day life. So, first of all, what is mantraic prayer?
So, a mantra it's a Sanskrit word, generally taken from the Hindu or Buddhist tradition, which means a short word or phrase that is repeated as a way of giving the conscious mind something to work with, so that our mind isn't running off to various different thoughts and imaginings, as it so often does when we try and come to stillness. So it's more than mindfulness. Mindfulness is simply being present to the present moment as it is, right? So just being with the thoughts, noticing them, etc. Whereas mantraic prayer is another stage kind of underneath that, where we begin to stabilize the mind. And again, there's an intention that goes with the particular mantra. Yes, we have it in the Judeo-Christian tradition as well. It's there from the beginning. In fact, it's present in all religious traditions. Most people nowadays, in the West at least, would be familiar, when you say mantra, they would be familiar with that. But in the West, we called it the versiculum, which was the little verse or little word that was repeated, and it was taught from the very earliest stages within the monastic tradition. St. Francis himself practiced it. It's probably most readily known in the West now in its kind of, I suppose, in one of the most complicated ways, if you want to call it like that, is the rosary itself, which is a form of prayer, the repetition of the Our Fathers, the Hail Marys, the Glory Bees, the somatic element of the moving of the beads, and the meditation, at least in the early stages, in terms of visualizing what we call the mysteries, the different events in the life of Christ and his mother. The other form that's most readily known within the West is what we call the Jesus prayer, or sometimes known as the FK or the EFKA. And the word EFKA has the same root as efficacious. In other words, it's something that does something to you. And it's the invocation of the name of Jesus, the repetition of the name of Jesus while united with the breath. The original Greek, Jesus Christus eleison imas, which is Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. Sometimes expanded to Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on me. But even over time, the recommendation is that would slowly shrink down to just the repetition of the name of Jesus or Jesus. So what does it do? It gives the mind, at the early stages, it gives the mind something to focus on and chew on. So it allows us to come into a deeper level of quiet and stillness. But as your listener, Matt, I think was the name, said, there comes a point, and this is readily recognized in all of the traditions, where the outward senses begin to fall away and inner stillness happens. And there is no longer a kind of a conceptual thought going on, but the bodily mental experience of the mantra repeating or sounding internally continues. Now, what should you do in that moment? You should just allow things to be. But the moment you have noticed that has happened, you're out of that. Yeah. Okay, you have moved away. So this is the difficulty. And what tends to happen then, at least for the beginner, is they begin to go, oh, that's terrible, I'm out of it. And so now they're 2 levels out of it. They're having an argument about being out of it. So the recommendation of all of the monastic fathers, and this is true in the Buddhist tradition as well, true in the Jewish tradition where mantraic prayer is also used, is simply notice you've come out of it, restart the word and return. One of the lovely images within the monastic fathers for mantraic prayer that I love, I absolutely love this, is they say that the beginner in meditation, when you say to somebody, sit still, don't think of anything much, just be present. It's like taking somebody and throwing them into a fast moving river and telling them, swim against the current, you'll be fine. For a little while, they'll manage, but eventually the current will overcome them, the current of their own thoughts. They're dashed against the rocks. And the Rai monastic father who was talking about this says, and they'll never get in the river again, because the experience is so awful. He says the next stage, however, is to give them the boat of breath. So you place them in, but you say, this time, don't worry about the thoughts, just observe the breath. So that's mindfulness, we would call that in a basic today. Right? So you put them in the boat and they're rowing against the current now, but they're with the breath. He said it lasts a bit longer, but eventually they will grow tired, their focus will fall, and they'll be dashed against the rocks again. But he says, the one to whom is given the gift of the word, the versiculum, the mantra, is like somebody who gets into their boat, takes up their oars, but now throws an anchor over the side. The anchor catches and holds them. The boat, the container of the breath, is the physical aspect that they're there present. The thoughts still continue because we can't stop the thoughts. But now the thoughts just go by and we float and we're simply there. But I think it's a really good visual image of what the three stages
absolutely.
do.
Yeah.
And that's from a Greek monastic of about, I think, the year 500 or so.
Oh, wow.
So these guys were great psychologists. They understood the mind because that's what they did. They went into the desert and they looked in, just like the Tibetan lamas, just like the Sufis, etc. They looked in and they began to work with what was there. So the only remaining piece, I suppose, is to try and understand that the mantra itself has no magical power in and of itself. It is, again, attention and intention connected to that have a particular blessing. The only differentiation we would make on that in the Christian tradition is we would say that the name Jesus has a particular authority because it's the name chosen within the incarnation. But again, our intention and attention must be pure for that. So there's a lovely story of a Tibetan Lama who really wanted a very powerful mantra, and he finds one of the great ascetics, the great saints up in the mountain, and he just won't leave him alone, begging for the mantra that will bring him to enlightenment. So eventually the old ascetic calls him over and whispers right into his ear and says, this is the mantra, repeat this, you will gain enlightenment. And he does. He gains extraordinary enlightenment. Like he moves through the cities, he transcends suffering, etc., all of that. The very end of his life, he's dying and he's still repeating the mantra. And he ends up in this nunnery where the sisters are looking after him as he's dying. And it's a great privilege. And they bring in one of the oldest nuns who comes from the same part of the country that the great saint of old had come from, who had given him the mantra. And she's looking after him and she kind of listens for a moment and she leans down to listen to the mantra and she starts laughing and laughing and laughing. And the old monk opens one eye as he's dying and says to her, what are you looking at? And she said, do you know what you're saying? And he said, no, it's the sacred mantra that the saint gave me. And she said, what you've been saying for the last 40 years over and over is manure, 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 manure. And it's a wonderful story. There's great, great truth in it because it's the intention and attention that accomplished the movement, not the authority of a particular word. So I think we just need to be aware. There are no shortcuts, unfortunately.
Oh, what there were.
Yeah, indeed.
Jody is asking, Jody says, interest in the paranormal, specifically paranormal investigations, I feel invite or even encourage the other to take interest in you. What specific interactions and experiences would you consider it a warning to take a step back and take a break?
This is really, really important. So before you go in, I think it's really important, again, you form your clear intention. You have some kind of spiritual practice that is about grounding and protecting. Okay? Obviously, I would recommend the practices within the Christian tradition. That's who I am. It's what I am. But whatever your tradition is, however you find it, I think you need to make sure that you have good grounding and all that. If you are somebody who suffers from depression, mental illness, addiction, any of those kind of things, I would be very, very careful about getting involved with the paranormal at all in an active way. simply because you're going in with a certain lack of mental and emotional stability. And I've seen it have very negative effects for people who have gone in with that. I'm not saying don't completely, but I'm just saying be aware.
Right.
Be really aware. The second element I would say is, as things go on, if you are beginning to separate yourself from the ordinary, if this becomes all-consuming, if it begins to break down relationships. So one of the things we've noticed, I mean, I've certainly noticed, is somebody begets an interest in the paranormal, right? And their wife, husband, partner, whatever it might be, thinks, wonderful, they've got a new hobby, that's great, off they go, and they do the thing. If they don't draw the other partner in, the emotional buzz, the emotional high of experiencing these things with others, and then being unable to communicate the level of how important the thing was when you go home, will often create a kind of a feedback loop whereby the person begins to spend more and more time with the people who get it or who understand it, and becomes more and more separated from wife, husband, children, partner, whatever it might be.
Comes up in the UFO world. A lot of people talk about their sort of UFO wives and husbands, even if they're already married. And I don't think I mean it romantically at all. These are just people they connect with.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But human beings are human beings, and it can become connection in a way that C.S. Lewis famously said, the best friendships begin one of two ways. Two people looking at each other saying, oh, you believe that too? Or two people looking at each other and discovering they're complete opposites. Mm-hmm. And he also, Riley then says, and romantic relationships generally begin in the same way. So to be careful of that, anything that begins to absorb attention or anything that's generating fear. If someone is receiving serious dark dreams, we're getting serious now about stuff, serious continual dark dreams, suicidal thoughts or ideation, arriving from a seemingly nowhere, taking refuge in addictive substances or activities or whatever. Or, and this is one we always watch out for, and it's one that needs to be very subtly handled, but unusual pain, aches, lack of energy, physical energy, no interest in anything other than the stuff itself. Especially, and this is one of the things to look out for, not cleaning. A sudden drop in height where people will actually lose the awareness that, that their body needs to be looked after.
Sure, yeah.
So all of those kind of things are kind of warning signs. And naturally, the health warning we would put on all of this kind of stuff is, again, like I said before, you're walking into other territory, other things' homes, not necessarily knowing how you are going to be met, whether the thing is something real that you're hitting or whether you're hitting a nexus of story and intention and all of that kind of stuff. You just need to be very clear. And I think you often say it as well, and I've said it as well. A sense of humor is the most important thing to hold on to.
Absolutely. Take breaks.
You understanding your...
Sorry, go ahead.
Absolutely. No, taking the breaks is the biggest thing. Taking breaks, putting yourself into the movie thing, taking the holiday with the folks, reading something other than paranormal books or watching stuff other than paranormal media. And also the thing to ask yourself about anything you're doing in life, doesn't matter what it is it making me more compassionate, more open, more kind, more loving, or is it making me irritable, angry, closed off, prejudicial? Like, that's a basic discernment for anything in life. And I think that's really important.
One of the saddest stories I have ever heard was one of the early Bigfoot investigators. I'm not going to name names because I'm not honestly sure which one it is. It's one of the ones who wrote books and people. Sure. But he was, at some point, his wife came to him and said, "It's me and the kids are Bigfoot," and he answered immediately, "Oh, Bigfoot, wrong choice."
Yeah.
If you're making that choice, it's the wrong choice. That's given your choice between your family and this other thing that you don't even really know what it is. That's the wrong choice. Yeah. And if you feel like you're making that choice, you're making the wrong choice. I'm telling you.
There's an old principle around fairy magic, which is it begins with you receiving a lot and them asking for little.
Mm-hmm.
And it ends with them receiving everything and you receiving nothing.
Yeah.
And I think that's a principle across a lot of this world for people to be very, very careful about. Is I know people who've given up jobs. I know people who have, retreated completely from family and friends. I know people who've become obsessed with kind of, the conspiracy, or that they will be the one who will solve it. Mm-hmm. Or even worse, they are the one who has solved it.
Right.
And everybody else is wrong. In as much as we speak of things like dogma and things that must be believed within the tradition, etc., we're very conscious of where the other things are that we kind of say, well, we don't know.
Yeah.
That's a very important thing to hold on to.
And the one last thing that I would add is, if you enjoy listening to the stories on podcasts and reading about them and watching documentaries and so forth, and you think, oh, maybe I want to, try doing the other side of it, and you do, and you immediately say, I don't like this, go with that. Like, enjoy the stories and step back from, you don't have to participate.
Sure.
Yeah.
No. And sometimes we can kind of feel that that's what's being asked of us when it isn't actually what's being asked of us. So, yeah.
Strange Familiars is brought to you by our patrons. Thank you, patrons. Thank you so much. We could not make Strange Familiars without your help. If you like Strange Familiars and you'd like to help us make the show and get extra content besides, you can become a patron at Patreon. It's patreon.com/strangefamiliars. All of our patrons get commercial-free versions of the weekly show, plus extra content. We do at least one full extra episode exclusive for our patrons every month. For more information, go to patreon.com/strangefamiliars. Our Patreon patrons also get other bonuses. For instance, all of the questions for Brother Richard from listeners for this episode and the next, they were from patrons. So that's a little bonus you get. You get to participate in the show and come up with questions. There's also an ongoing paranormal experiment that we're doing, and our patrons get to participate in that. That is launched already. It's in process, but the way it's set up, you can join at any time. You can participate at any time as long as you're a patron. Again, for more information, patreon.com/strangefamiliars. There's also an option via Apple Podcasts, and our Apple Podcast subscribers also get the commercial-free versions of the weekly shows, plus the extra episodes monthly as well. And very soon, we will be starting memberships on YouTube, and our YouTube subscribers will get the bonus episodes monthly. So check it out. Go ahead and subscribe to us. You don't have to become a member of the channel on YouTube, but if you subscribe, that helps us out, and that's free. The YouTube channel is at Strange Familiars on YouTube. One word. Sam is asking about your thoughts on tulpas and thought forms. And we did cover this a little bit before, but again, I think some of these things are worth coming back to every now and then, especially because they're so ever present in this world,
Yeah, it turns up again and again. So I suppose, first of all, the tulpa idea that most people in the paranormal have is concentrated mental activity that produces a thought form that may have, to some extent, independent or semi-independent existence, right? The problem is that comes out of Buddhist, particularly Tibetan Buddhist, but also Hindu texts as well, around the projection of consciousness, which are extremely complicated, subtle texts. And West, and particularly the Western paranormal tradition, has kind of just grabbed that wholesale and brought it over, and it turned it into something very simplistic.
Yeah.
So we need to be very kind of careful of cultural appropriation and that kind of stuff. However, taking it as what most people think it is, do I believe that can happen? Yes, I do. And I believe things like, for example, the Philip experiment, the stories of Alexander David Neal, the great explorer of Tibet, and whatever you think, whatever anybody thinks of her theories, what she achieved even just physically, as particularly as a woman at the time she was traveling, is absolutely extraordinary. You know, in the Western tradition, we would speak of what we call our eidolons, and eidolons, again, where a number of people would put a lot of energy, attention, intention into particular, forming a particular thing, and then usually for a particular purpose, generally for a nefarious purpose. But one of the questions again becomes, at what point is the tulpa just a coat for something else to wear?
Right.
And I think that's what, for example, Alexandra David Neal, she had created. I mean, I always laugh about this because her tulpa she created was a Franciscan friar. Actually, that was what she went with, this kind of Friar Tuck guy who slowly over time went from being an image that she was holding in her mind to an image that she could see but nobody else could see, to eventually an image that people saw from time to time. And then over time she lost control of it, she says, and it became something else. She began to get very afraid, in fact, and kind of nasty feeling from it. And when she went to do the unraveling of it, it fought it hugely. And it took a lot of effort and a lot of support from other Buddhist lamas and monks to dissolve the thing and finally get rid of it. So, yeah, I think as well, when we look at things like residual haunting, for example, or the idea of, I mean, you've had it with some of the Gettysburg bridges and things like that, where stories have been created, people go there. I think we can unconsciously generate tulpas as well. And I think some of those things are, you know, I mean, I really loved the guys you had whose theory were around the, well, the ghosts are more likely to talk to you if you look like them.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I smiled at that first and then went, well, hold on. Lots of the friars who turn up to talk to us, you know, we look exactly as they did. So maybe there's a certain familiarity on the other side as well that's needed. But I think that's kind of tulpic, if you like, in form. I've encountered what I would say was definitely residual haunting in some places, particularly hospitals, where something manifests in a kind of a personified form, but is really just, it's, I would guess, more the kind of the pain and the suffering that's present within a particular place. And we have kind of rituals and prayers that we do to clear that, to dispel that. So yeah, I do think that they're there. I think, but the differentiation between what's a full-on tulpa, what's a residual haunting, and what's a kind of a crisis apparition, they're slightly different. And then we see in ascetics and contemplatives and saints of all of the various traditions this idea of the kind of bilocation, or being able to, you know, appear in different places at different times, to stretch one's consciousness, was the way one saints talked about. Pio talked about it. He said there were times when his angel would appear on his behalf, looking like him. He would be unaware that happened until somebody told him. And then there were other times where he would be in deep prayer and meditation and would feel what he called a stretching of the soul, would suddenly find himself elsewhere. Obviously, when he was there, he could be encountered physically, etc. People, you know, received things from him. He touched them, held things, moved things, etc. But to all intents and purposes, he was still back in his original place. So, but he always felt that was a gift bestowed by a higher, rather than something that he was kind of able to do on command.
Probably a good time to bring up Ed and Andrew, who want to talk about Padre Pio. So Ed just wanted to hear talk about Padre Pio in general. Andrew said, I know you've discussed these purposely, but he wants you to talk a little bit more about the purpose of such supernatural occurrences and how and where the line gets drawn between church-approved manifestations and other less desirable ones.
Okay, so a lot in that. So let's start with what we call the charismata. So charismata in the Christian tradition would be essentially what the siddhis are in the Hindu and Tibetan tradition, the idea of unusual or extraordinary occurrences, powers, etc., that appear. So we differentiate between what we call the greater charisms and the lesser charisms. The greater charisms are ones that you have yourself. And so love, faith, hope. These are the presence and movement of the divine in our own being. And every human being receives the greater charisms. We receive what we call a supernatural infusion of those at baptism in our tradition. And so, in other words, a very different conforming of the soul to these channels. When we speak of the lesser charisms, they're the ones that most people think of as the greater. So things like prophecy and stigmata and miracles and all that. But the church is very clear that they're actually lesser. They are simply manifestations or supernatural ability that are given in the good sense for the upbuilding of faith. So in the church's understanding, a miracle, the only purpose of a miracle is not the healing of the person concerned or the raising of the dead or whatever it might be. It is to deepen the faith of the entire community. So all of the charisms then are given for the upbuilding of faith. Building of faith, the strengthening of hope, and the deepening of love is the way it's put. So when someone is being put forward for canonization, while we look to see our miracles worked through their intercession or through their prayer, they're not canonized based on the miracles. Canonized based on what we call heroic virtue. So the idea that this person has gone above and beyond in the pursuit of faith, hope, and love, and the various gifts of the, peace, patience, love, kindness, gentleness, all of the fruits of the Holy Spirit. So that sort of puts the foundation, and then we can talk about the individual, Padre Pio. So Padre just means father, like you'd say to a priest in Italy. His religious name was Pio, or Pius, we would say in English. He was born Francisco Forgione in the little town of Pietrelcina, very, very poor, very, very poor family. From the very earliest days, he had a tendency towards faith and religious life. He discovered later that not everybody had sight of the angels or apparitions or visions. He just presumed everybody else had because he had them. To the end of his days, he had constant visible sight of his guardian angel, who he called the companion of his youth. And the angel would appear to him at the same age that he was all the way along.
Oh, neat.
Though sometimes appearing younger as well. So he eventually he was entranced by St. Francis particularly and wanted to become a Franciscan, so he became a Capuchin, one of the branch that I belong to as well. Died in 1968, but one of my favorite stories about him comes from one of our own brothers, now dead and gone, but I lived with him for many years, who went to stay in the friary during the war years. So that was during the time when nobody really knew about Padre Pio at this stage. He was under investigation by the Vatican, so he was only allowed to live within the friary. This was the second investigation. The first one was for 7 years when he wasn't allowed to have contact with anybody other than a friar or Vatican-appointed officials. The second one was particularly interesting because the Vatican insisted that 2 of the doctors involved must have been either atheist or communist. They were not allowed to be practicing Catholics to ensure that they wouldn't kind of give in based on faith that couldn't be an accusation like that couldn't be made. So anyway, our brother Bruno, an Irishman, a good solid northern man. If any of your listeners out there have watched the TV show Derry Girls, that was the accent that he had, that lovely northern accent. Went all the way over to Italy, failed absolutely at learning Italian because the Derry accent does not work with the Italian at all, but lived in the friary for a number of years and kind of observed Pio. And all the way through, he just saw a very ordinary friar who was present at all of the various exercises. The only thing he knew was that he had 2 permissions that were unusual at the time. One was he would come to meals, but he very often didn't eat. He had stomach illness, that meant that he didn't eat, but he ate very, very little his whole life. In fact, went through many years of kind of extreme fasting. And the other permission he had was that he could stay up at night to pray in the chapel, because in those days, every moment of your day was organized by the rule, and you could stay up in your room and pray, but Pio had permission to stay at night in the chapel. And Bruno was still a little bit kind of, well, is he, who is this guy? Until one day they were in the church and Father Pio was helping distribute Holy Communion during the Mass. And as he came along to one particular woman, he presented the host to her to receive. And instead, she grabbed his arm, pulled his arm down, and kissed his gloved hand where the stigmata was. And Pio erupted. He had a very rough, strong voice. If you ever, his voice is there on YouTube, etc. If you listen to it, it's a real strong Italian voice. And he turned on his heel and went straight back into the sacristy, and one of the other priests had to kind of continue in his stead. So our brother was very intrigued as to what he had said. So he asked a number of the brothers, and they were kind of a bit loath to say, but eventually they said, well, he said something like, you stupid woman, kissing the hand of the butler when the lord of the house is in front of you. And that was the moment when, for our brother, he kind of went, okay, I'm with him. No problem. It wasn't about him as such. He bore the stigmata, the 5 wounds, open wounds in hands, feet, and side. And that wound in his side, through very painful but medical investigation that took place regularly, they discovered was an open wound to the heart and was bleeding out quite regularly. He bore those for 50 years. He should have died. The wounds never became infected, never became any lesser than they were. Though he prophesied himself that he had asked that they would be removed from his body after he died. And the week before he died, they suddenly began to close. And when he died, the medical inspection was done of his body at the order of the guardian in the house. And the wounds had completely sealed with new skin. There was not even scars. Along with that, he also once a week on Thursday nights received the crowning with thorns. The shoulder wound would open and he would receive the stigmata of the scourging. That was never made public until after he had died, but the friars would assist him going through. He was a powerful exorcist. There's extraordinary stories of healing and extraordinary stories of, particularly what he had was the reading of hearts, which was people would go to him for confession. He would spend about 16 hours a day in the confessional hearing. People would go in to say their few little bits and pieces. He would suddenly have full knowledge of their whole life. I know of people who refused the chance to go to confession to him because they were too frightened that he would see everything.
I mean, on the opposite side of that, often not knowing who's on the other side of the confession, I just give it all because I figure you never know.
It's the way to do it.
Yeah, that I'm sure priests have heard it all, so I might as well just.
I can assure you we have.
Yeah, might as well just give it all and have it there. So.
And then he was known for many of the kind of rarer charisms. I mean, levitation, illumination, glossolalia, which is a form of tongues whereby either he is heard speaking in the person's own language, even though he didn't know it, and other people around heard him speak in Italian, but the person to whom he was directing the language, the conversation heard in his or her own tongue. Or reverse glossolalia, which is that he could hear somebody confess in their own language and he would understand it completely. There are remarkable accounts of invisibility, of him becoming heavy as rock or light as air.
So here's the thing, as regards to acceptable and not acceptable, if you go to, like, the National Center for Padre Pio is in Pennsylvania, if you go there, you will find dozens, if not more, books about him. And in each of these, you will read different amazing things he did. Now, were they church endorsed? I don't think so, because you don't have to prove every single one. Correct me if I'm wrong. They would prove. No, absolutely not. No. Yeah, they would prove what's necessary. Yeah. For sainthood. The miracles necessary to it for that.
The investigation is a very deep one. Yeah. For example, everything that he ever wrote, everything that he ever preached, that would all have been examined. All of the letters. I actually knew at one stage one of the Monsignori who. His job was to theologically go through all writings of the candidates of saints. And he was telling me he was very glad that he was due for retirement in a year or two, because they were just about to start hitting candidates for sainthood from the digital age. And he was saying, suddenly there's an explosion. So he said the thoughts of having to look at the tweets of everybody to see whether they had preserved virtue all the way through was something he just didn't want to have to do. But at the same time, I suppose in the end, it's about the fruit. It's always about the fruit. Yeah. So in terms of, whether or not miraculous phenomena is good or not is judged on, well, what's the fruit? Is it producing deeper compassion, deeper love, deeper grace, or is it separating people? Is it making people afraid? Is it, affecting people in a... We differentiate between two kinds of fear, what we call salutary fear, which is the fear that happens when someone gets a shock, their worldview is shook. Nowadays, in the paranormal sense, we'd call that ontological shock. The idea of suddenly, the world is more complicated, bigger than I ever thought, and there's a shock as we move into that. That's salutary fear, because eventually that becomes peace. But negative fear is something that actually is just about terrifying. I suppose crushes the spirit of the person in some way. And that's one of the big differentiations I would make, for example, when it comes to prophecy. So if you look at a lot of whether it's the kind of occultic prophecy or the supposedly alien prophecies or whatever, what you often find is it's fear, fear, fear all the way through. Everything is doomed, everything is destroyed. You might be lucky enough because you're the seer to survive, but it's inevitable and there's nothing you can do apart from maybe give ourselves over to you and we will save you. What you find in what we would call genuine Christian prophecy. So say, for example, you look at, we looked at it over 2 or 3 programs, I think, the Fatima and end of things. What you find is that, yes, it can be quite clear that there are terrible things to go through, but the end is always, and all shall be well. Everything shall be well. Like in Fatima, in the end, my immaculate heart will triumph. In the end, there will be peace. In the end, there will be grace. And I think that's a key factor for somebody, if you're examining these things, is to ask, well, is this begetting peace? Is it begetting grace? Like I remember I won't name it, but I remember one series of visions that was going on, visionary experience that was going on, the church was investigating it or whatever. And the people at the heart of it became, there was a lot of questions around money and where money was going. There were questions around impropriety and marriages broke down, that kind of stuff. And immediately the church, look, we don't know where this is coming from, but it's not coming from a good place. And, advise people to avoid it. People still went to it because they were hungry for the miraculous phenomena associated with it. I'll do good things through that, of course, absolutely. But it's always examine the fruit. Examine the fruit. That's the thing. Don't let the fireworks, bells and whistles distract. They're only meant to be there so as to move on. I mean, St. Paul in Scriptures puts it beautifully. He says, prophecy will fail eventually. Miracles will end. Like even the dead who are raised eventually die. In the end, there's only 3 things that last: faith, hope.
Yeah, I'm somewhat frustrated with a friend who, I'm not going to name names, who has made a big prediction for next year. Something big's going to happen, world-changing event, and won't tell me what it is. And I kind of feel like, are we friends? Like, if this is a major thing, like, and I even got to the point where like, write it down in an envelope, seal it with wax, and lock it in a box, and tell me when it happens.
That's one way of doing it. Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I think that's maybe if there's a condition of secrecy. What I always often ask about these questions is, especially this kind of secret stuff, is if this thing is going to happen come what may, and if it's being engineered by some kind of entity or some experience that's so powerful that it can do this, then how would me knowing about it stop it from happening?
Right.
Because if that's the case, then I'm more powerful than it.
Right.
So at the very least, I think there's that argument from a logical point of view. And secondly, there's even the whole thing of, right, look, if you really want this to happen, then, I always think of the guy who, I won't remember his name. He started some kind of a cult in the 1800s. I think they were a breakaway group from either the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormons. Can't remember which, but anyway, they broke away completely. And he told them all that, the biblical prophets were coming. They were coming back. and he gave them a date, and they had to build this mansion in the middle of the desert for these guys to live in. So they built this huge mansion, and then they created gardens around it, and they imported plants from the Holy Land so that when they came, they would feel at home. All of these beautiful gardens, etc. And of course, the date came and went, and then the next prophecy was, well, they will come when you're worthy enough for it. They've asked me to move into the mansion to mind it for them.
Yeah.
By their fruit, you know. So, you know, that's what we try and hold.
Yeah. All right, Allison.
Yes.
It's Curiosity of the Week time. And I think unbeknownst to you, you brought one on theme.
Really? Yeah.
Because Brother Richard does mention satyrs in our conversation. And here we have a really cool stereo view. Do you know what year this is from?
Those are early. That's like 1860s.
I was going to say that these flat,
really thin.
mounts like this.
Civil War era kind of.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a stereo view photograph of, I think it's a satyr and a faun we figured out, right?
Yeah.
And he's playing a little pan flute kind of.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be Pan and Daphnis. Maybe?
Okay.
Daphnes? I don't know.
All right.
My pronunciation's probably off.
It's a cool sculpture. So this will be our Curiosity of the Week. And I'll take an image of this. I'll put it in the show notes. If you click on that, it'll take you to our Etsy shop where you can purchase this and other Curiosities of the Week, those that are left. While you're at Etsy, make sure to check out our other offerings. You can get Strange Familiars t-shirts there, Strange Familiars stickers, Strange Familiars patches. You can get my books. If you get them from us on Etsy, they will come signed. I sign them before we pack them up. Some of my music is there. Artwork is there, prints and originals, including the artwork for tonight's show. Allison has various bits of photos and ephemera there as well. Go ahead and check it out. Our Etsy shop name is Lost Grave, but if you go to Etsy and you search Strange Familiars, you should see our stuff come up. There's also links to the Etsy shop in the show notes to every episode and at strangefamiliars.com if you prefer to get to it that way. And as I always say, purchasing from our Etsy shop is another way to support the show and get some cool stuff at the same time. Speaking of supporting the show, the GoFundMe is still up. I want to thank everyone who's donated to that. That is to help us purchase new tech, new equipment. We're trying to start live streams. We're trying to add variety to our video offerings here. We have a certain way we do the video for the episodes, but we're trying to add some variety to that. We need cameras. We need different boxes to help us with the video for live streams, et cetera, et cetera. All of that's to help with that. That said, if we don't get the new tech, we're not going anywhere. The show will continue. So I want to be very clear. Only if you can afford to help, please do. If you can't, don't worry. It's not like the show's going to stop if we don't get the new tech. It's just a big help if you do. And the GoFundMe link is in the show notes. And we did post at strangefamiliars.com, I think Instagram and Facebook as well. All right. That's it for this episode. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode of Strange Familiar. I Have Never Minded the Loneliness, Hermits and Their Stories, is the latest book by Timothy Renner. What compels a person to leave behind society, forsaking family, friends, and the comforts of modern life to live in solitude? The hermits of the 19th and early 20th centuries are as fascinating as they are mysterious. These enigmatic figures often became the focus of public interest, with newspaper stories turning them into local legends, folk heroes, and symbols of a life apart. In I Have Never Minded the Loneliness, you'll discover the extraordinary lives of hermits who defied convention. John Stink, rumored to have died and risen again more than once. William Woodruff, whose long vow of silence followed a broken heart. Brusher Mills, the serpent hunter who sold his own snake oil remedies. And Truman Commodore Downs, who claimed Mars as his homeland. These stories and many more reveal the complex lives of individuals who chose to live apart from the world. I Have Never Minded the Loneliness is available now at Amazon.com or wherever you buy books. Strange Familiars is a production of Dark Holler Arts. Intro and background music is by Stone Breath. If you want to hear more or purchase music, you can go to stonebreath.bandcamp.com. We are on Facebook, facebook.com/strangefamiliars. We have the Strange Familiars Gathering group there as well. Anyone can join that. You can discuss the show or other paranormal topics, weird history, all kinds of related stuff. We are on Instagram, @Strange Familiars, one word, no underscore. Please give us a follow there. For Strange Familiars merch, go to strangefamiliars.com/merch. For everything else and links to everything we do, go to strangefamiliars.com.
Which you bleed. Red is the road that brings you to me. Bright are the lilies in your way, quietly walking like some lost saint. And lo, the blood falls at your feet, and colors red the waving wheat, and runs upon the swaying ride. There is a blood moon in the sky. And now we walk by a red light, two wandering pilgrims in the night, two fisher kings without kingdom. The stars are only diadem, and lo, the blood falls at your feet, and colors red the waving wheat, and runs upon the swaying ride. There is a blood moon in the sky. Brother of stars and winding way, brother of song through night and day, brother by time, by drought or flood, brother by deeper root than blood. And lo, the blood falls at your feet, and colors red the waving wheat, and runs upon the swaying ride. There is a blood moon in the sky. There is a blood moon in the sky. There is a blood moon in the sky.